Welcome back to the IE427 Garage, everybody. Today we're working on the Coupe. We're continuing work on the Holley harness and the chassis harness and all the harnesses. And come right back and I'll get you caught up on exactly what we're working on. The way we ended last week's video was that I was showing you some of the Holley harness and the fact that when we sent it over to the dyno, the engine and the harness, it came back missing some parts. And so I've ordered those parts. They're here. And I've also got a 20 amp fuse right here that I'm going to go ahead and put in the harness in that location where we're missing a fuse. So that is right down here. Where was it? That's not it. Oh, here it is. Right here. Right here. So we're missing this fuse right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the fuse in. So that's in. So we actually have 3 inline fuses here. We've got the one right here that goes to the VVT stuff. We've got one over here that comes in on the main power line. So that's this one right here. And then we've got one up here that is going to the ECU itself. So plenty of redundancy in this. And now that I've got these connectors, I actually ordered 3 of them. So there should be 3 in this bag. Here's one. And you can see these are the Delphi connectors and the cap. And all I need is the cap. Of course, it doesn't come with a fuse, and that's fine. But I figured I might as well order an extra 1 or 2 of these to have on hand so that if this happens again, I have them in stock and I don't have to order them. So this cap will go on the one that we're missing. And now that that fuse is in there, we should be pretty well set on the stuff for the Holley harness that's inside the car, other than hooking it all up to the computer. Out here, what we ran into is this sensor. This Holley's calling it an MAT, which is a manifold air temperature sensor. It's also known in other automotive instances to be an intake air temperature sensor. So it can be either or. In this case, it's intake air temperature sensor because that's what Ford designates it as. And generally speaking, the sensor would be mounted in the airbox or in that intake air stream post air filter. And it's just to give the computer an idea of what the ambient temperature is of the air that's coming into the throttle bodies. We had some discussion with Borla, and actually Borla was absolutely no help whatsoever. I had already read on the Holley information that Holley basically gives you 3 different locations you can put it in. You can put it in the manifold. So we actually have a brass port right down there. So if you look in here, right here, there's a brass plug. We could pull that out. I could screw in a manifold air temperature sensor, and we could hook that up to the computer. The problem is we'd probably have to rescale it because it's going to give a temperature of the actual intake manifold, which is, in this case, acting as a giant heat sink for the engine. And I don't know that it would give a true reading of the ambient air coming into said throttle bodies. The other thing we could have done is we could have basically drilled a hole in one of these horns. These horns actually come off. I'll show you on this one because I know it'll unscrew. But these horns come off. They just unscrew. So we could take one of these out. We could drill it right in here. So right in this area right here. And we could put a sensor at the backmost throttle body. I'm not going to be able to get this thing to screw in. There we go. At one of these back throttle body horns, and that would give us a true reading of what the ambient air temperature is going into the throttle bodies. We'd probably mount it down on this bottom side facing up and try to hide it like on the inside here, and then the wires would join with the wires back here. And then the third spot that I found in reading on some of the Holley nomenclature or information that's out there on the interweb is that you could just place that air intake temperature sensor somewhere in the engine bay. So we could put it back here on the back, of the engine near the firewall or on the firewall, make a small bracket for it, put it right there. Wouldn't be in the air intake stream, but it would at least give it a good idea of what the ambient air temperature is in the engine bay. We could mount it up here at the front somewhere. We could even mount it just behind the radiator somewhere in the radiator tunnel. I think what we've decided on is that we're gonna mount it right here. There's a bolt hole right here and right over here. This one has the best chance of getting air movement across it because it would be underneath the surge tank, so it would get air basically through the bottom here. So there would be some air movement across it, and it's not mounted into the manifold. Now, in our conversation with Borla, they basically passed the buck. They said, oh, we don't give you any provision to mount intake air temperature sensor in our stack system. And I'm like, no shit. Because had they done that, it sure would have been nice to just screw in a sensor and be done with it. But I guess you can use a number of different ECUs to manage their stack injection system. However, there has to be a particular spot in their minds where an intake air temperature sensor would work the best. And like I said, they just kind of passed the buck, and I was kind of unhappy with their answer. So I, in turn, had the car owner put a call into Holley, and the answer that he got back from them was basically what we had already determined before we called anybody, and that is it could go in any of those three locations. Although it sounds like either in one of the intake horns for one of the throttle bodies or somewhere near the front of the engine bay where it's going to have air passing across it is the best spot. So I think we're going to mount it right up at the front of the engine, and I'm going to make a small bracket for it. I've got the sensor over here. Basically, I bought two different sensors, and I had the customer buy a sensor as well. The sensor that I had him buy was the GM sensor that would have been a screw-in sensor for the intake manifold, and we would have had to rescale inside the computer settings in order to make it work, but it would have worked. And then I had him get, I actually bought these two Ford sensors. One is this one right here, and it's a push-in style sensor, and I've already got a grommet around the outside of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a hole for my bracket. I'm going to put the grommet in the hole, and then I'm going to push this into the bracket, and that's going to hold it secure. I got the same sensor, but a screw-in style. They're both about the same cost. I think they're about $9 a piece, something like that. But that's the sensor I think I'm going to use, and I'm going to mount it right there at the front of the engine because there's already some pre-tapped and pre-drilled holes that I can just basically put a bolt in to secure my bracket with. And I think it's going to be low enough down on the engine, really nobody's going to see it. It's light in color, so it's about the same color as the raw aluminum that the engine block and everything else, the heads are made out of. So I think it's kind of going to disappear in there. Next, I'm still working on the cooling system. I've just got to get the last couple of hoses hooked up. I've got the intake. It's actually the return from the radiator tube hooked up to this point, and then I've got to get that last 90 in. So I've got the power grip clamp down in here, and then I've got a traditional clamp out here because I think it's just going to be a better spot that we have a traditional clamp right there, because trying to get in there to get a power grip clamp cut and taken off down there is just going to be impossible. And then I've got this last hose that's going to go from our surge tank to the engine T, which is right here. And I'm going to try to get those done here in the next day or two. The wiring is continuing. I've got the last sensor, obviously, is that intake air temperature sensor, whose cable is just kind of sitting over there, and I'm going to thread that underneath the manifold and out to that spot that we discussed. In here, nothing's really changed other than the fact that I've got all of the Holley stuff through the upper tunnel piece. Now I did finish, and I don't think I covered that in the last video. Basically what I did is I made a split bracket right here. So I drilled a 2-inch hole behind this bracket, and that allowed me to get all of the Holley connectors, because some of the Holley connectors are even bigger than this one. And trying to get those through a grommet that's made for 1.25 inch hole is next to impossible. So with my split bracket here, and then I actually split the grommet as well, I was able to get all that stuff put in, put the brackets in behind it. So all this is ready to go. I just want to confirm that nothing else needs to go through this grommet, and then that'll get riveted in. But it also makes it serviceable. So if this ever had to come out, draw out a couple of rivets, split the pieces back apart, and the entire harness can come back out. And I just like to think ahead on stuff like this so that we're not stuck in a situation where we're having to, cut into a piece of metal, sheet metal, in order to get the harness back out. This way it's not too hard to drill out a couple of rivets, pull the harness out, and if it ever needed a repair or anything like that, we can do it relatively easy. So I got that done. The other thing that I did is I did get the fuel pump wire. So this green wire, and it's loose. You can see I got a bunch of extra here, but I wanted to get it through the Ron Francis chassis harness to the fuse box. And so I threaded it through with a piece of number 12 solid wire that I would use like in a house, just as a fish tape. And then I pulled the green fuel pump wire in behind it. I got that tied into our fuel pump relay. And I just wanted to get that done on this side. And I knew I could basically shorten up that green wire later if I needed to, which I'll probably do once everything's in place. So that green wire goes right into here, and it ties to this orange wire back here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it too good, but it ties into the orange wire for our fuel pump relay that's in our Ron Francis fuse box. And so that's all ready to go. I've got the circuit for our fan pretty much ready to go. That needs to be tied into one of the I/O wires on the Holley. And then I also talked to the car owner about the trinary switch for the AC, because we need the AC basically whenever it's turned on to activate the cooling fan. There's a couple of ways to do that. I think what we're going to do is we're actually going to let the Holley system control it. So we're just going to send a negative ground signal to the Holley, and then the Holley will activate the cooling fan through its internal relay, and in turn close our relay and turn the fan on. I think that'll get us all caught up to today. I did a lot of work over this past weekend, and I failed to pick up the camera at every chance. So I was able to get a lot of stuff done, but I didn't document a lot of it. So that's kind of where you're at. I'll catch up with you guys tomorrow or later today if I have anything else I need to show you. There is one last thing for today, and I posted this on social media on purpose because I knew that it would get a reaction. So I've got our Tilton reservoirs hiked up here to where they're higher than the hood or the bonnet of the car. And I would have done this differently in a Roadster. Usually I just use a couple of speedy clamps or vice grip clamps or whatever they call those things that we use in the construction field. And I would have just clamped a piece of sheet metal to the bar, and then I would have, clamped the reservoirs to that sheet of aluminum. Basically, all I'm trying to do is get the reservoirs high enough that they'll start to gravity bleed to the masters. And it's not perfect because you can see right at this corner where they make their turn, that's lower than the masters. But it's amazing how much this helps. When I came into the shop this morning, the levels on the reservoirs were down to about here, which means I filled them up to this upper line last night before I went in. And the clutch, for instance, was all the way down to here. Both the brake reservoirs, front and rear, were down about a ½ an inch. And I hadn't done anything. I hadn't touched the pedals, nothing. I just basically put the fluid in there and let it sit overnight. And it really does help to do that. These masters are very hard to bench bleed because you have to have a reservoir attached to them to bench bleed them anyway. So you basically have to bench bleed them in the car, and when you've got that loop on your lines from your masters to your reservoirs, it makes it really hard to get the air out. And I see just constant reminders of this online when guys are saying, my brakes suck. Well, the reason is you got air in between your reservoirs and your masters. You need to hold that reservoir up or pull it up and clamp it to something to get the masters bled before you even think about bleeding the rest of the lines, because you'll never get that air out if you don't do that. So I just reminded myself when I looked over and I saw that I had done that last night. So there you go. This everybody, they immediately have an opinion when they see the picture, but they never click on the picture to see the explanation. And if they just took the time to click on the picture, I give an explanation of why it's up so high and why I've done this. But nobody has the patience to click on the picture and find out exactly what it's all about. I'll see you guys tomorrow. It has actually been a couple of days. We had the weekend, and we had a breakfast get together on Saturday. So a bunch of the Cobra guys came over on Saturday morning after breakfast, and they got a tour of the shop, and they got to see the latest project, which is of course the Type 65 Coupe, and that the Coupe owner was here too. So that was nice because when people had questions, he could answer them directly. Here's where I'm at. I ordered a spring for this coolant line because the way the bend is right here, it's a little bit tight. And the problem with this hose is it's 1 inch out here, but on the ends it's 3/4. And so because of that, I had to order a spring that would fit into the end of this hose. So I ordered, it was, it's marked as a 3/4/5/8 inner hose spring. So it's made out of stainless steel. It'll thread in here, and that hose will be inside here and keep this hose from collapsing in this corner. So I've got that here. The car owner also ordered a connector for our I/O on our Holley system. So the I/O connector is for our inputs and outputs right here. And we need to attach our fan. So we need to get a signal for our fan to turn on, and we also need to tie in our trinary switch from our AC, and that trinary switch will then tell the Holley to turn on the fan whenever the AC system is kicked on, basically. So he ordered that connector, and it came today too. So we're looking pretty good on parts right at this moment, because all the parts that were ordered Friday made it here on Monday, which is amazing. That like never happens. But I'm going to take advantage of that and probably work on getting that spring put in tomorrow. And I may even start working on that connector, the I/O connector over there for the Holley, and see what I can do for that. I've got 2 connectors that still need to be connected behind the engine, and those are for the injectors and for the coils. So the injector and coil harnesses need to be plugged into the main Holley harness. After that, I'm pretty much done back here. I think I'm probably going to take the TPS, this lead right here, and shorten it. And I'm thinking the easiest way to do that, let me go around to the other side, see if we can get a better view of the TPS, because this is the way I did it when I was doing it prior to the dyno session. The TPS is right here, and I don't know if you can see it, but it has 2 screws. And I can take those 2 screws out, and I can take the connector apart, and I can actually shorten that on the bench. And then I can put the TPS back in place. With it where it is, even with the lift all the way down, I'm leaning over the engine and it's just uncomfortable. So I'm probably going to pull that out and shorten that connector, or shorten that lead from the connector, so that we just don't have so much cable here. I've got about, I don't know, 10, 12 inches of extra cable I don't need. And so I'm going to take care of that. And then we got Friday, I think, we got these 90-degree fittings. So what was happening, I have this side low enough, meaning I cut this factory outlet down, and then I found this really cool hose. I think I told you about that in a previous video. This side cleared. The other side doesn't. And so when I go to put this together with just this 90 straight into the end of the fuel rail, this right here hits this. And there's really no way for me to shorten this. I mean, I guess I could, but there's no way to re-bead the end of it because it's such a small little tube. I'd have to try to like put it into my flaring tool and create a bead with the flaring tool, and it's stainless steel and it's pretty thick. I could probably use the hydraulic bead, or the flaring tool, the hydraulic flaring tool that I have, but I don't know. I don't want to take the water neck all apart and all that stuff. This was just, I think it's a better solution long term. It allows us to service the fuel rails if we need to, but it's just a simple 90. We got the shortest 90s we can find. These are AN8 or JIC8, depending on which industry you're in. And it just brings the lines straight up and then across. Now they're not tight. I've got them loose still. We'll tighten them up before we do our first start. But I just couldn't find another simple solution to getting those to connect without having interference with that outlet right there for the water. So this was probably the easiest solution, and long term it's probably the best because it gives us the most access to the fuel rails if we need it. So I think that's where I'm going to leave this one. I don't know what I'm going to be working on next week. The accelerator pedal and cable still need to be connected, but I had to get all of this wiring done first because that all goes below the point at which the accelerator cable connects into like the turnbuckle assembly for the butterflies for our stack injection, and I didn't want to have it in the way and try to have to work around it. So I've waited this long to get the accelerator cable hooked up. I may tackle that. I'm going to hold off on putting our covers on our wires until we get a little farther. I still need to get some spiral loom around these wires here and dress this up a little bit. You can see I've got one of these factory Ford style zip ties that snap into one of the holes, and I'm going to use that to kind of pull these back out of the way and neaten them up, and we'll see how that works. But that's it for this week. If you guys are enjoying the content here, please do the like, the share, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.